Welcome to Crowdmark Sessions, where we bring educators together to explore innovative teaching practices and redefine learning in today's world. Join us as we dive into discussions that inspire and transform the way we think about education. My name is Michelle Caers, and I'm the host of Crowdmark Sessions podcast. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Crowdmark, the leading grading and assessment system for education. Our mission and values of integrity, collaboration, and community are at the core of everything we do at Crowdmark. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing trailblazers from our community of educators to hear their perspectives on learning, technology, and the changing landscape of education. We've got a phenomenal list of guests that will be appearing on the podcast, and we look forward to sharing their ideas with you. Welcome to Crowdmark Sessions, where we explore the pressing issues shaping education today. In this episode, we delve into a crucial topic, academic integrity, and the evolving challenges educators face in maintaining honesty and fairness in the digital era. Joining us is Dr. Corey DeGagné from Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, an expert in academic integrity who will share his insights on fostering ethical learning environments. But before we welcome Corey, let's set the stage with some key statistics that highlight why this issue is more important than ever. Academic integrity has always been a fundamental pillar of education, but today's landscape presents new challenges. The rise of online learning and the vast accessibility of digital resources have amplified concerns about plagiarism, cheating, and unauthorized collaboration. A study by the International Center for Academic Integrity reveals that nearly 68% of undergraduate students admit to some form of academic dishonesty during their studies. The shift to remote learning has exacerbated these concerns, with 93% of instructors in a Wiley survey believe academic dishonesty is a growing issue, especially in online courses. And meanwhile, students are seeking more guidance. 60% report wanting clear definitions and better education on academic misconduct, what it is, and what it means to them. As technology continues to advance, so do the tools for upholding integrity and those that challenge it. How can institutions stay ahead and cultivate a culture of trust, fairness, and accountability in education? To help us navigate this complex landscape, we're honored to welcome Dr. Corey DeGagné, an instructor in the Faculty of Computer Science at Dalhousie University. As an academic integrity officer for the past 4 years, Corey has played a pivotal role in identifying and addressing academic misconduct, leveraging tools like Crowdmark to support his efforts. He's collaborated with us in the past, presenting on best practices for academic integrity, and today we have the privilege of gaining insights from his firsthand experience. Corey, welcome to Crowdmark Sessions. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let's dive into this important discussion.
Yeah, this is exciting for me.
Great. Okay, so I find it's really helpful that we all have a shared understanding of what the topic means. So if
Right.
you could you define what we mean by academic integrity and maybe share some insight on why it's so important in higher education?
Yeah, of course. Now, this actually, interestingly enough, probably changes a little bit from institution to institution. Our Senate is really the one who defined academic integrity and what an academic integrity allegation or violation is. And in fact, that's something that we are discussing within our faculty on that. So, for instance, as per our, policy on academic integrity, I know we'll be talking a bit about the use of artificial intelligence, for instance, but the use of artificial intelligence in and of itself is not an academic integrity violation as per what our Senate has defined it to be.
Okay.
It it leads into other violations. So, for instance, plagiarism or violating rules of assessments, things like that. So, this is a conversation that we're currently having is what really is academic integrity within the guise of AI? How do we set up our courses so that students clearly know what is and not allowed within different types of assessments? Within our realm, at least at our institution with academic integrity, the main violations that we see are not following rules set out in different assessments.
Hmm.
Um, Cheating or plagiarism are the main ones that we see throughout the institution. And just so for some background, I come from computer science. So we don't get a lot of, say, inappropriate citations or things like that, just because we're not a very heavy writing department. But I do know that's an issue in other areas of the institution. So where I will most likely focus on is those violation of clear policies or rules set out for each of the different assessments, submitting work that is not your own, which would be plagiarism, and then just cheating on a test, which in itself is still plagiarism and violating rules of
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
assessments.
So, academic integrity or enforcing it or
Yeah.
supporting it has been an evolving concept.
Yes.
If we look back to pre-internet days, students would find a way to get around the rules or the guidelines while they're sitting at a desk with a pencil on paper.
Yeah.
And then, fast forward to 2025, and the ingenuity and creativity of students
Yes.
in this area continues to be impressive.
Yes.
So
I've seen some very interesting cases, even in the past year, of new things that I would never have thought of before that they were finding ways. Uh,
awesome. So
yeah,
I'd like to explore that a little bit.
yeah, sure.
Can you share some of the most common academic integrity challenges that educators face? Like, what are some of the really interesting ones?
Some of the most common ones that we see, and again, this is coming from the perspective of a computer science faculty or department, is in our first and second year courses, we have practicums, so coding tests. And inside of those environments, we have a software that we use that will record, I think, every 3 seconds or every few keystrokes or things like that. So a very common one is if we see students pasting in outside resources into their test, we can see that.
Mm.
So for instance, if the entire thing gets highlighted and then the entire thing magically changes, it's very easy to see that there are plagiarism cases going on where students are using either outside resources or using generative AI models. An interesting one on this, though, that we have seen is, we were used to seeing these copy and pasting
Okay.
instances, but one that came up, I think, in the past few years, and again, this goes back to student ingenuity, is you have to sign into our learning management system in order to access the test. So
Hmm.
what students would do is send their login credentials to other students or other people, and they both log in at the same time, and students would type in the questions into the testing software so that the other person would see it on the other side. They look for answers and then they type it in. And how we found this is these weird questions, like the question itself being typed in verbatim, or in one instance, and this kind of hurt a student, but what is the professor talking about? The professor is so stupid. This is such a dumb question. Like, they were having conversations with each other through this. And of course,
Oh,
we can see the entire conversation. So that one was a funny one that we saw. But to kind of go back to some of the challenges is, how are we trying to create environments for students where they can learn and can be successful in their learning so they don't have to try and turn to this, but then also just trying to make it a little bit more difficult to dissuade students that are kind of on the edge of cheating to try and do so. if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah.
So for instance, I think we're looking into some softwares that like completely stop the access of accessing the internet during a case. So there is no conversation between servers or going online, stuff like that. But I mean, we have found students who want to cheat and who get themselves so far into a hole that their only option is to cheat. They will always try and find a way to cheat. So
Hmm.
we're kind of focusing on how can we prevent that feel that they have to cheat in order to succeed.
So a common thread that we have here at Crowdmark, because our everyday is education and
Yeah,
assessment, is seeing some creative student approaches to finding answers and thinking if you'd only spend as much time studying as you did trying to figure out
exactly.
how to cheat the system, you would probably be doing very well.
Right? Exactly. It blows my mind sometimes. Like they put so much effort into cheating that if, yeah, exactly what you said. If you just put this effort into studying, you would be so much more successful.
Right.
Um, and that again that's conversations that we try and have with students. One of the issues that I think we're really trying to see is how do we give this information to students in a way that it's accessible. So like students right now, they're very used to TikTok, Instagrams, these really short form media
Hmm.
where we have found like a lot of us educators, we say record our lectures now, we post them on the learning management system. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible, which is really good in some respects. Students can go back and they can, review the lecture. And students who say are in scenarios where they just can't attend class because of life scenarios that may pull them outside of class, whether it be high tuition fees or whatnot, that's forcing them to work maybe a bit more, supporting some of their family, they can still access that material if it's posted online. But one of the drawbacks with that we're finding is it's difficult to have these important conversations and make sure that all students hear it, because a lot of them say don't come to class or they only see the main topics online and then they go elsewhere to try and learn. Like a lot of our, not a lot, but there's a significant portion of our students that will just look at the practice assessments and they won't watch any lectures or anything. They'll just go on to YouTube or stuff and try and find that information. So we're trying to figure out how can we really have these important conversations with students about academic integrity and the importance of it. And we try and do that, say, at the beginning of the semester. A lot of students attend in, say, the first week, and then it
Hmm.
slowly goes down from there. So we try and have these conversations in like orientation week and stuff. But I think just with how busy students are, how stressful life is right now, both in and outside of the academy, it's hard to keep that message going, because I mean, people violating academic integrity, it's not fun for anyone. It's not fun
No.
for faculty. It's not fun for the students who are putting in all the effort and then they see their comrades getting the same grades that they are, putting in fewer work. But then the thing that they don't realize is at the end of the degree, they need to have that information to get and keep a job. And from speaking with industry, they're finding it very easy to weed out the people that they see. Oh, you don't actually know what you're supposed to know. And then they can't keep jobs. And then by that point, it's too late. So yeah, it's really important. And it's stuff that we're trying to do, but we are finding it difficult.
It sounds like you're trying to educate students on what it means and why it's important in both short and long term. In
Yeah,
short
exactly.
term, you if you get caught, there's big consequences, and in the long term, you won't learn what you need to sustain a successful career.
Exactly. And I mean, what we see is, thankfully, I don't know the actual stats off the top of my head, but most students who go to academic integrity, we only see once, which is really good. And the academic integrity process is really set up for the first offense to be very educational.
Okay.
So we talk about, and it depends on the unique case, but a lot of the time we try and focus in on why is academic integrity important, how to avoid it, what to do if you're finding that you're stressed, you're not able to make your deadlines, or you just don't know what to do. What is the right path forward to get you through this? And luckily, I would say 75% or more students we don't see come back for a second offense. So that's a really a big positive, I think, in that. Unfortunately, the other hand with that is we do see a lot of repeat offenders.
Okay.
And I think what happens with that is if they come in and to the institution and, you know, they don't study throughout their first year, they violate academic integrity, they're not taking it seriously. By the time they get into especially third and fourth year, they get stuck
Mm.
because they don't have that foundation. And then the only thing that they can do is cheat. It seems like for some of them. And then they come back for 3-4 times. And by that time, it's too late for them. So
Hmm.
really trying to catch it early in our first and second year core courses, particularly, that's where we really are trying to spend a lot of time in and have those conversations.
Well, I can see how the information sharing, the education around it's important because it seems rather opaque or lacking in transparency. Like I don't know that everyone knows what happens.
Yeah.
And what the like is it 3 strikes and you're out, or is it like one and done? Like people don't really know even what it means.
Yeah. And what makes it a little bit more complicated is, and again, I can only speak from our institution here at Dalhousie, but the policy that Senate has laid out is very simple in the fact that it just defines what the processes are, who's
Mhm.
allowed to make decisions at what level. And that has changed over time. So, for instance, at one point, our Senate Discipline Committee was the body that heard all academic integrity cases throughout the entire institution. And they did that for many, many, many years. But then, as more and more cases started to come up, they then allowed different faculties to have those to decide on, say, the first offense.
Okay.
Okay, they haven't had an offense before. We're two logged. How about you take the first offenses? And then it turned into now you can take the second offenses as well, because there just became too many cases. But go
Let's
ahead.
talk about the increase in cases, and I'm
Yeah,
I'm gonna guess that it may have something to do with the rise of generative AI. And do you think that this has had a big impact on how institutions approach academic integrity? What's the impact of this generative AI?
absolutely. Now, to go back a little bit, the main increase in cases happened just before generative AI. We saw a big swing at the beginning of COVID when everything went online.
Right.
So I remember my first summer of 2020, one of my courses, I had, I think, 50 something percent of my class cheated on the final exam. You know, it was an
How do we
online,
know
no
that?
proctoring. How did I know that? I don't know if I can mention the website, but there are a couple of websites that are known for students posting questions because they want to learn how to do something, and then they get tutors to answer their questions for them, which is great. But it's not great when it's an exam question or a test
Right.
question. And so we know all of the different websites. So I can go on and I can check and I can see, oh, this came from my course and this is my exam question.
Hmm.
And then with those websites, they give us the information of who posted it, what's their IP address, what's their email that they use for it. So we get all that. And then I'm not going to lie, it was a big detective work on mine to find. I think I had 100 and some students that cheated on that exam. I had a 200
Wow.
student course. Yeah,
So that is a
but
lot of work on the instructor side to
it
be a
is.
detective and to hunt these things down. And not everyone's really prepared to do that.
Yeah. And I did that for the beginning of COVID because we didn't really have a system set up. We didn't have, say, Crowdmark or anything like that set up.
Mhm.
And so now I actually don't have any online assessments. I know there are some institutions that do online assessments and do it very well, and they have a good setup for that. I like having in person assessments
Hmm.
because it is more in a controlled environment, we can see really what students are doing. And to tie it back to Crowdmark, for instance, I use Crowdmark for all of my assessments. And particularly for the in-person one, a strategy that I found that works really well, placing all the tests out in order. So if two students sit next to each other, the booklets that they get are consecutive numbers.
Oh, okay.
So even if there are instances where we can't catch something, we have in our faculty, we have quite large class sizes. I wouldn't say as large as the big institutions, but for instance, the smallest class I think I've had in the last 5 years is 100 students. I normally have 150 students a course. Last
Hmm.
semester I had 600. So like, how do you can't watch everyone at the same time. So what we do, put them out in order. If we don't catch something, we may catch it when we're grading. If the graders are marking the same question and one booklet has the one weird wrong answer and the next booklet has exactly the same answer, that is suspicion enough to go forward with an academic integrity violation. So that's how I've been able to manage the large class sizes and academic integrity. The biggest
Hmm.
tool is the booklet numbering system that Crowdmark has.
Well, let's talk
Um,
about this a little bit more. And I've talked about it in a couple of podcasts and so I guess it just keeps coming up. So COVID was a really big impact. And
yeah,
it's interesting, like for Crowdmark, it was huge. And I've talked to other people while other folks were staying home for the first time and learning how to bake sourdough bread and not knowing
yeah,
what to do with their time.
I was one
The
of them.
Crowdmark team, who had already been a remote team for a number of years, kicked into high gear, and we were working very long hours and rapidly developing new features for online assessments, as well as onboarding record numbers of instructors who really were asked to go online overnight without much support.
Yeah,
And so for Crowdmark, it was a really big, high impact time. And for universities, a lot of them were left scrambling for some kind of academic tool to support academic integrity. And
yeah,
some of them, because everyone was doing these online exams, went for a digital proctoring solution.
yeah,
These digital proctoring solutions had some inherent bias in them and created a lot of problems for students, and turned out in the end that maybe they weren't even fair. So they were trying to get to fairness and created barriers and unfairness in the methodology. So what can you speak to around that whole online COVID situation with the proctoring tools?
yeah. What I ended up doing is we use Microsoft Teams.
Hmm.
Is the software that our institution has. Skype, you would be able to do this as well, or any of those. But I used to have to go through and I would split up the entire class into groups of, I think, 9.
Hmm.
Because if you had a Teams chat open and everyone had their cameras on, I think you would be able to have at the time 9 cameras before it would minimize some. And so we would have 9 students, or I think 8 students in a room and one proctor.
Hmm.
And all of them had to have their cameras on and their microphones on so that we could hear and see what they're doing. And in a class of hundreds, that's a lot of setup. That's a lot of proctors, a lot of money. And it's
Hmm.
also not foolproof. We would try and ID them, show us your room, but we always had instances where there may be someone else in the room. And I mean, that is also obvious. We're in COVID. Students, a lot of them live with other students, and a lot of them live with other students of the same faculty or department or course.
Right.
So they would say, well, this is my only place that I can write, and my housemate just happens to be in the same course as me. So there were a lot of challenges that we faced. So I definitely don't know the answer to the best online proctoring.
Hmm.
That's the solution that I came up with and that some of my colleagues adopted. I probably can't say it enough that I was very relieved when we were able to come back to in-person assessments. I've kept a lot of online tools, online assessments as far as formative
Hmm.
things are concerned.
Hmm.
Um, but for me, anything that is summative, anything that is worth a substantial amount of weight in the final grade is all in-person summative stuff for me now.
Absolutely. So again, we get to see what universities are doing across the country, around the world, in terms of assessment. And we've seen a huge return to paper-based assessments for this reason. Just the access to information online and the inability to enforce with 100% certainty that everyone has the same fair testing environment.
Yeah.
People have gone back to the classroom. So the traditional testing methodologies have proven to be the most effective.
But I've recently discovered, because we have an amazing student accommodation center,
Hmm.
where some of my students have an accommodation where they need to be able to type their answers and use a computer for it, which I completely love for them, to fully access the course.
Hmm.
And so in that respect, I have a printed, regular booklet test for the class, but then I use the online assessment for them. So I'll duplicate the assessment and have text boxes or PDF uploads, and they will get an electronic copy of the test that I can send to them at a few minutes before the testing time.
Hmm.
They write in accommodations, it's in a controlled setting for them, but they're also able to access the test, and it really doesn't take that much more work for me to set that up. I actually discovered this last semester because a student, rightfully so, wanted to use the computer, and so I got their blank Crowdmark test back with just a printed out sheet. And so I had to cut up all their answers and glue it and tape it onto the Crowdmark thing so it could be marked. And I'm like, there needs to be another way for this. And there was. I just needed to create an online test and then sent it to them, and then it could be graded just like all the other ones.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Really good to hear.
Yeah. So I love that. And actually recently I used the non-booklet tests too. I'm using all three of them. Had a
Okay.
supplemental exam last week for students who weren't able to write the exam last semester, but all of them had to write different parts. So I just gave them their own tests and then scanned each one in separately into Crowdmark under its own test.
Hmm.
So, and that worked really well as well. So,
Excellent. Well,
yeah.
thanks for the information about how you're using Crowdmark. I was going to ask you about that a little bit later in our discussion. Maybe we can circle back to that.
Sure.
Okay, so how would you say that or how does Dalhousie support promoting a culture of integrity rather than just enforcement of rules?
That's a very good question. And it kind of goes back to that education piece that I talked about, really
Hmm.
trying to have conversations with students about the importance of it. So, not just trying to police it, but having genuine conversations about how it would affect their future and the importance of them knowing the information and just taking ownership of their own work. And then there's also, say, legality issues as well, at least in computer science. If you take code from someone that you don't have the rights to take, you can actually open yourself up to liability reasons. If that company finds that you're using their code, they can sue you for it. So having those conversations that students may not be aware of. So there's that. But also I think a big portion is really letting the students know, for the ones that are doing academic integrity properly, not making violations, doing it honestly within themselves, that rewarding them, they are putting in a lot of work, they are getting grades that are true to what their knowledge is, and that really the difference between, say, an 80 and a 90 or a 70 and 80 at the end of the day doesn't really matter that much when you finish university. So having conversations about the importance of it, the future, so that students can buy into why it's important, and have students just take pride in the work that they do, I think
Hmm.
that's important.
So if you look at law programs, they always have a course about ethics.
Yeah,
And there's a big emphasis on that. And certainly in medicine, there's also emphasis on ethics. Do you think that there should be a course that is mandatory in a computer science degree that is about ethics and ethics in computer science, and
absolutely.
particularly with artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. And that is that we do have a course, thankfully, in ethics. We also have a course in like the law. We have a couple law courses as well
Hmm.
that students can take so that they're really aware of, say, ethical programming, what is legal, what is not legal, privacy laws, security laws. We're lucky to have a really strong cohort of instructors and professors inside of our faculty that we can host these courses for students to know that side of computer science. Now, I know not every institution has the ability to do that. I come from a very small university myself. My undergrad wasn't at Dal, and I didn't have that background in my undergrad university. And I think that's a course that I would have really benefited from taking. So, yeah, absolutely. I think any sort of ethical work just legally you can and can't do, and whatever your realm is, I think is a course that probably every discipline should have at
Hmm.
some regard. Absolutely. Yeah, I think
What are
that's
your thoughts on
hugely.
making it mandatory versus an option?
So I believe ours is currently mandatory, and I'm trying to think, we are currently, and this kind of goes into artificial intelligence conversation, but with AI, we are trying to reinvent our entire degree system right now. So I can't say too much about it, but just with the different trends that are coming up, we're trying to really harness the power of AI to
Hmm.
better prepare our students for what the industry will look like in 5 to 10 years. So, for instance, again, in computer science, a pathway used to be just becoming a coder, where you'd spend 80% of your time just doing scripting or different coding, 20% of your time reading code and problem solving. We think now that that will completely shift to 20% of your time being coding and the rest of it problem solving and reading, because of these large language models that can just easily program very simple things for you, that the industry is changing.
Hmm.
So I think there's something like over the next few years, and maybe I don't want to give too many numbers because I'm not entirely sure about these, but something like, say, 10% of just coding jobs may be on the decline versus 25% incline in more higher up positions for computer science. So the entire industry is starting to change. So we're trying to change with it, and not necessarily, like I said, shying away from AI, because I think it's an absolutely amazing tool for learning. I
Hmm.
think it's a very strong tool for education. It's a really good place for a starting point. I will be one of the first to admit, if I have to write some sort of document or grant proposal or things like that, I might just use ChatGPT to get it started. Like, it's always easier to change things and add to things and work with something versus starting from scratch and starting with a blank screen. So perhaps, like I said, harnessing the learning environment of AI, but then being very clear, going back to academic integrity. Okay, you can use AI to learn, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to have these skills, and you have to be able to use these skills, say, on your own or within these certain realms.
Right.
Um, so that's where, for instance, in my courses, for anything formative, all of my assignments, everything that's not a test or an exam, I don't care how students learn the material. If you want to use ChatGPT, if you want to talk to your friends, if you want to copy from someone, I don't care. I make those assessments worth 1% of their final grade, and then they're tested on the same material that's worth, say, 20% on their final grade. So if they don't learn, they'll get 1% and lose 20%. So that's where it kind of balances out. But I make it very clear, you're allowed to use AI or talk with other people in this respect, But in these tests and in these other environments, I expect that you then have learned from that process and that you're able to do it on your own.
That sounds very fair and reflective of what life is like when you are in the working world. Like
Yeah.
no one sits you down and says at a job, you have to do everything by yourself and don't ask me any questions. I
Yeah.
would never want a work environment like that.
Right. I think a lot of jobs are wanting to build community and working with a group and working off people. I know all of my courses I've developed alongside some of my amazing colleagues, and it definitely wouldn't be at the level that it is without them. So yeah, I think it's AI is an amazing tool that can be used if done properly and if students are taught properly how to use it. I think a really dangerous thing maybe, or maybe not dangerous, but something to maybe shy away from is no AI ever. I don't think
Right.
that's realistic of where the industry is going.
Hmm.
I think it's more so, can we as educators change our courses to enhance them with AI instead of trying to pretend that it's not there, because it is,
Right.
and it's going to be around for a very long time, and everything is changing. Like Deep Sense that just came out, was it Deep Sense or DeepSeek? DeepSeek, I think, just came
Hmm.
out, and that's completely changed. That ChatGPT was the most amazing AI model, and now DeepSeek is so much faster. Like everything is changing so rapidly that I think it's silly to try and pretend that it's not there. So yeah,
One of the things that we've always stood by and we continue to do when we approach the use of AI with Crowdmark is that AI, when harnessed correctly, can optimize workflows and save
absolutely.
time for instructors, but we will never try to replace the expertise of instructors or that dialogue between instructors and students with AI. But we
Yeah,
can use AI to do matching, administrative tasks, tedious
yeah,
tasks that nobody else wants to do anyway,
yeah,
that computers are really good at doing.
yeah,
And the smarter the computer, the better job they do of it. We're seeing amazing results with OCR, with the MLLMs and different things that they can do. But we want to maintain the support for the instructors to give that individualized feedback to students in Crowdmark
yeah,
when they're grading.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I use AI in a lot of different fields in my job. So simple things like in a meeting, we take a transcript from Teams, we record the session, upload it to ChatGPT. Hey, can you summarize all of the points that were discussed? Now we have minutes that we don't have to actually write out.
Right.
Or if we're trying to, I know that I was part of developing a course. We're like, here's the learning objectives, here's the idea. Can you create a lecture plan for me? It did. It didn't do so well, but it was a really good starting point, and then we can build off of that. And I think, like I said earlier, I think it's a really good tool for administration tasks, data analysis, just getting things started. Again, it's
Right.
very easy to change something when something's on paper versus trying to think of something from scratch. Yeah. So, and going back to just the classroom, I think if we can teach our students how to use it properly, that instead of making, say, small incremental steps, because we have to teach all of these different things, we might be able to get our students to a much higher level faster if we show them how you can really use AI to at least get somewhere. And then can you analyze what it's doing? Can you figure out when it's lying to you, when it's having a hallucination? Those
Right.
conversations. Yeah.
So getting students to use it early so they know how to use it effectively.
And ethically, and knowing when they can use it and when they can't use it. And
Okay,
again,
this
as a learning
perfect
tool.
segue.
Yeah.
Perfect segue into my next question. What are some common misconceptions students have about plagiarism or cheating?
Common misconceptions of plagiarism or cheating. I think some students aren't sure entirely of what those may mean, particularly plagiarism. I know
Hmm.
one thing, for instance, and this always gets students, is self-plagiarism. So I don't know how
Oh,
common that is in other institutions, but so for instance, if a student has some sort of work that they've done, if they resubmit it without citing their own work, then that's self-plagiarism, which is an interesting conversation. Yeah.
that's very interesting. I
Yeah,
wouldn't have
so
thought
say if a
that.
student took a course and say they weren't successful in it the first time, if they just resubmit their assessments under our policy, that violates academic integrity because they're plagiarizing themselves without
Wow.
citation. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's one that students aren't really aware of. I think in our faculty, though, and I can probably extend this to all of Dal, there's been a lot of work in, say, our Center of Learning and Teaching and in our own CS. We have a CS education kind of sub department inside of our
Hmm.
faculty. We have a really
Hmm.
great team there that puts a lot of really educational materials together. And we use Brightspace as our learning management system, and we have a Brightspace course for our students on academic integrity.
Okay.
And so they have to do it. I know our Center for Learning and Teaching, I believe it's them that manages the university wide one.
Hmm.
So, for instance, I was at one point a French student, and any student in the Faculty of Arts and Social Science has to take this module every semester so that they're aware of what is academic integrity and what is not. Luckily, I think a lot of our students, if they do that test or if they do that course, honestly, not just trying to game the system, but actually looking through it, we have lots of scenarios set up about what is allowed and what's not allowed of all the different types. So, cheating, plagiarism, self plagiarism, committing to the act of plagiarism in some sense. So, giving your work to someone. We have scenarios for all of those things. And we actually make it mandatory for students in our first year core courses to take those.
Hmm.
So if they actually don't pass that course, they can't pass our first year course. So their passing grade is tied to that academic integrity module. So I think in a lot of aspects, that has helped our students a lot. I mean, we still have cases coming forward. So we can maybe look into seeing, is it maybe it's definitely effective, but maybe it's not as effective as we may
It
have
sounds like
liked. But
students can't say that they didn't know. I didn't know.
exactly. Exactly. And it stops from them. They're like, oh, I didn't know you can't do that. Well, you took this course. You had to have known,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, and kind of going back to like the severity of penalties, I know we touched on this briefly, but typically as students come back more and more, those penalties go up. And one of the reasons is because if you violated academic integrity once, you should know about it. So you should know not to do it again. So it's taken as an aggravating factor. But I would say a lot of the cases that can kind of throw students that we see a lot, where the students aren't automatically, yeah, I cheated. Like I think a lot of them know if you Google something and paste it into your work and it's not yours. Some of them try and pretend that they didn't know that it's not allowed. But I think deep down they know it's not. But plagiarism, self plagiarism, like I mentioned, knowing the line between if a friend comes to you and asks you for what you did on assignment, what should you say? How much information should you give to them?
Hmm.
So, for instance, our kind of rule of thumb is you can talk about assessments with students or with your friends, but you shouldn't ever write anything down. Like, or if you do, make sure you say erase the whiteboard, throw your notes away, go for a 10 or 15-minute walk, and then do it on your own. Because we definitely don't want students to feel that they can't talk about things, because we know in the workforce, like we just said, it's very collegial, it's very community working, and you work with people. It's just in assessments, you need to be able to do it on your own. So talk about generals in cases, or maybe you should look into this lecture or look at this example that they did in class,
Hmm.
and then go for a 10 or 15-minute walk. And then when you do the assessment yourself, it's really your ideas and what you've learned from those discussions instead of
Absolutely.
passing here's the work that I did. Because even though if it's in full intentions, good intentions, here's my work, don't copy it, it's too hard not to.
It is.
It's
It
too
is.
tempting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because it's just right there for you.
Yeah.
Earlier, you mentioned that Crowdmark helped in maintaining academic integrity, and you used Crowdmark in different ways. Could you maybe just give us an overview of the different ways that Crowdmark has helped you in this aspect? To be more specific about it.
Yeah, sure. So I know I've given this kind of talk a couple of times in our summits and things, but two of the big ones that stuck out. The first one that I mentioned earlier is the booklet system, the numbering system.
Mm-hmm.
So I know not
So you're talking about the QR coded
the
booklets?
QR coded
Okay.
booklets. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As how my courses are set up right now, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to really utilize online assessments that Crowdmark has for academic integrity,
Mm-hmm.
just because, again, I've tied those to formative assessments. So I don't check for academic integrity there, anyways, because there's so little. Like I said, it's formative. I just want you to learn. I don't care how you learn it. But on the summative ones, the QR coded booklets, again, I get my proctors to come in preferably half an hour before the test starts, trying to lay them out. That's not always possible. Right now, I'm doing in-class tests, so I have the 10 minutes between class to get my army of TAs and proctors to help pass them out. But depending on the institution, the department, the amount of resources available to you with, say, proctors, that may not be an option. So, but trying to make sure that those booklets are all in order, we found that really helpful to be able to see, oh, like I said, booklet 45 has a very odd answer. Booklet 46 has exactly the same wrong answer, or booklet 46 has half of the same answer than 47, but then it kind of goes weird after that.
Okay.
Maybe that's when 47 turned their page and then the student was like, oh, now I'm on my own. So that's been a couple of things. And then one of my favorite cases, and I cannot say that this is common because it's not, it's happened once in the past 3 years, but we caught two students talking to each other and looking off of each other's tests during the test. And so, and a couple of different proctors, myself included, saw this. So I went up to them, I got their names, I wrote down their booklet numbers and their student numbers, but I know it's not my decision to apply a penalty to it. They are supposed to continue their work, and then afterwards we take it in, it goes through our academic integrity process. An academic integrity officer is the one who makes the call.
Okay.
That's
Mm-hmm.
how it works at Dal. So I took their stuff, separated them. They were allowed to finish their test. And then I had their booklet numbers, was going to put through an allegation afterwards. I got one booklet number out of the two. The other one went missing. And I checked everywhere at the end. I looked for their booklets, did not have it. The student took their booklet out, and it was confirmed by another student later. They came up to me saying, so and so was talking and just said that they took their test home because they didn't want to have an academic integrity violation. So, and under my setup, students are allowed to either write the test or the exam if they don't get a good mark on the test.
Okay.
So I think the student's idea was just, I'm just not going to hand this in. I'll rewrite it on the final exam, and then there's no academic integrity violation. Well, it still went through, and the student decided to say, I didn't cheat. We didn't have this conversation. And the booklet number you said I had isn't the booklet number that I have. And I'm like, well, that's not really, no, like I wrote it down and I don't have this booklet number. And they said, oh, well, I don't have the test with me, but I have a picture of the test. Do you want me to submit that? Sure. So they submitted a picture of them holding their test. And through easy detective work, what they had done is they printed out, they scanned their test. They went up and they knew that we were checking booklet numbers. So they changed the booklet number to a different number.
Okay.
And then they tried to pass off, and I don't know why, but they passed off that the booklet number I said wasn't their number. They had this different one.
Mm-hmm.
But, Crowdmark doesn't look for the booklet number. Crowdmark looks for the QR code, and if it doesn't see one, it looks for that long string. So
Right.
when I took the picture that they sent me and scanned it into Crowdmark, it matched it to its original test, the booklet number that I had. So the student was trying to forge, for whatever reason, their booklet number was different than the one that I was claiming that they had. And they tried, yeah, it was like, I don't know why this would prove that you didn't cheat anyways, but it's a very fun story. So in that regard, not only did the booklet numbers help, but the fact that the QR code, if they really wanted to forge their test, they would have to change the QR code as well, which I don't think undergraduate students have the ability to do.
No, that would be really difficult. And then
Yeah.
if the QR code was changed, then it wouldn't be a part of the series. And then you'd
Yeah.
ask them, where did that exam come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the main one is the booklet numbers, but I love my QR coded one because it's, again, it happened once in the past 3 or 4 years, but it's a funny
It
byproduct of the
is a
things you can do
very
with Crowdmark.
it's slightly entertaining story
Yeah.
of what the efforts people will
And
go
again,
to.
going back to your comment, if they just put that much effort into studying instead of trying to forge documents, they would probably learn a bit better.
One would think.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we're kind of coming up on the hour. I'll have one last question for you before we
Sure.
wrap up. And that is, what advice would you give to other fellow educators looking to strengthen academic integrity in their classrooms?
I think a couple of things. One is have honest conversations with students and try and do so early. Like I said, on the first day, second day, maybe third day, it's the best time that you're going to get your students and get their
Hmm.
attention. And then, as at least we see, and I think this is true in all of my colleagues' departments across our university, is as the term progresses, the participation goes down. So
Yes,
try and get them
absolutely.
early. Try and have honest conversations. And it's not just us policing, shaking fingers. You shall not do this. It's really showing them the end goal. Why is it important? And again, it's to make sure that you can get and keep a job, to make sure you're not, say, lining your future employer up for possibly a legal issue if you're taking things that aren't yours. But and I think honestly, the one of the most important things is to take pride in their own work. Like
Hmm.
they spent a lot of time putting their work together. They should be proud of that and they should get full credit on that. So having those conversations up front, having resources available online, like we have our academic integrity module, so that if students do find that they need a refresher or perhaps they do run into academic integrity early on, then they can go back to those resources and learn those important parts of academic integrity. And I think the other thing would be for educators, especially in the guise of knowing formative versus summative. Formative assessments, again, in my view, is as long as students learn, that's all I really care about. So,
Hmm.
yes, I have to test them at the end to make sure that they know it. But if I give an assignment, I mark it off of completeness. Did you just attempt to do it? I found that that has completely changed how my students perceive assignments. There's not the stress of having to get to the right answer. So I find fewer students having to go to or feeling the need to go to outside resources
Hmm.
because they just try their best, or maybe they just try the minimum to get the grade. But there's some learning through that process. And then I don't want to have to set them up again where they feel like they have to break academic integrity. So if I'm able to create those low stakes and learning environments for them, hopefully they learn more and they engage more with it. But then making that clear distinction between, okay, this was a formative assessment. I wanted you to learn. I don't care how you did it. Now you actually have to show to me that you did learn on the summative thing.
Right. So we've heard from instructors, and we heard from instructors even during the pandemic, that one way to tackle this challenge of academic integrity was to have 10 assessments worth 10% versus one assessment versus 100%. Because the pressure to do well on that one assessment for 100% was so high that students thought the risk and the reward was worth it. But if
Yeah.
it's 10% for all of them, then that risk reward is quite reduced, and then the students would learn something in the process.
Yeah. Now, what's funny in this is we definitely took that approach as well. And now we have seen that may not be the best approach. I think we need some sort of balance between them
Hmm.
because our students ended up getting miniature assessments overload. So instead of
Oh,
having, say, a midterm and an exam where there was a really big assessments, there are a lot of stress. Instead of doing that, we went to very small assessments frequently. But then every class, if they're taking 5 classes, they now have, say, 5 to 10 assessments due every week, and they just can't keep up, and then they get burnt out easier or quicker.
uh-huh, yeah,
Yeah, so
that
we're
is
trying
the
to find a balance.
consequence,
So
right?
where my courses currently are is I do these really low stakes formative assessments. If I have 5 modules, they get 1 assessment per module. And in some of them, I have 3 different formative assessments. They can pick and choose which ones they want to do. And again, it's really low stakes. It's 1%. So they don't have to go into academic integrity or feel like they have to cheat. They can just try their best. And then I have 5 tests. And the tests are worth a lot, between 10 to 20%, depending on the number of modules.
Hmm.
But how I've set it up is my exam or their final grade, the grade is per module, not per assessment for the big ones.
Hmm.
So if they get a lower grade on, say, their module 1 test, they can opt to take the module 1 portion of the final exam.
Okay.
And if they do well on the test, then they don't have to write that portion of the final exam. So
Oh,
it
that would
kind of
be a relief.
benefits,
Yeah.
right? And so all of the students that put in a lot of effort throughout the entire year, at the end of the course, they're rewarded with no exam. You have learned all of the learning objectives that I've asked you to do. You are done. Good job. You did it. Other students, you did really well, but there's 1 or 2 issues that you had along the way. Focus on those parts, learn those learning objectives. That's the only thing I'm going to require you to do on the exam, and then you're good. And the ones that meet the minimum learning objectives, so in computer science it's 60%, if they get their 65, they're happy. But if they wanted an 80, they can write the exam. And if their grade is better, I give them the exam grade. If it's lower, they keep their test grade.
I love that approach, Corey. I think
Yeah.
that's the fairest way to do assessment that I've ever heard,
Thank
and
you. It's
I've
not
heard of
my
that a
idea.
lot.
It's
Well,
not my idea. So
that's
I've
excellent. I
got it
wish
from
I
a
had
lot of
that
different
option.
colleagues and stuff. Yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's
So
great. Well,
thank
and
you.
thank you for all of your feedback and ideas and answering our questions and participating in our
This
our
has been fun.
podcast. It's been really interesting. I loved your stories. So thank you again, Dr. Corey DeGagné from Dalhousie University, and we look forward to hearing more about your adventures in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.
Bye.